Okay. Hi, everyone. First of all, if you would like to answer questions I will be having during my talk, feel free to either scan the QR code with your mobile phone or even through a web browser, just enter slide.do, so Slido, and as a participant there, just enter a code name DevOps, and you should be able, soon you will be participating in the dilemmas I will throw out at you. I see that Krzysiek and Kuba has already joined. Let me wait for a second so that more people can join. Yeah, and we will start in a second. So there will be 5 dilemmas ahead of you. All of them have 4 potential solutions. I will walk you through them, and we will see, what's the recommended solution, although not the only one, how you're doing, how you're thinking. I believe the learning outcome is better instead of just a boring lecture, especially if it's like a 1 hour thing. Okay, I see more people joining, so let me wait still for a second. 20, 21, 23. Still, there are no questions, so don't get anxious. I will be revealing them during my talk, and you will have time to answer those questions and dilemmas. It's for me, it's a way to have some kind of interaction with the crowd, just in comparison to pre-pandemic times when I could see you. Now I'll be able just to see your answers. So some kind of illusion of facial expression and just people either nodding yes or nodding no. All right, 33 people decided to be active. And okay, still it's growing. Okay, I think it's now it's 35 and it's not growing. Okay, 36, 37. Maybe the organizers, if you could post the interactive or the link on Discord channel, then I can move forward, because this QR code won't be available throughout the whole speech. So if someone is late and still wants to join in a more interactive fashion, just please share it on our chat. Okay, so let's move on. Let me start the session. Okay, so hi everyone. The topic of my interactive lecture is dilemmas you may encounter in your DevOps journey. My name is Tomasz Pająk. I'm a former software engineer. I used to be a backend engineer most of my programming career, and at some point in time when I joined a product company in fintech space where we could influence the environment we work in, I discovered what it's like to try to build high-performing organizations, especially if you're running a fintech product. And then eventually I stopped programming, and I tried to create the whole system in which people work. That's why when I speak about DevOps, it won't be that much technical or engineering oriented, because I was speaking about leadership, I was speaking about culture, architecture, process, and automation. So I think this may be a bit different than most of the talks at this conference. Nevertheless, let's move on, and let me expose you to the first dilemma. So let's speak about leadership, and let's imagine you are a CTO. You're a CTO of a mid-sized product company, and because you are a C executive, so you're the member of a management board, you decided to build a complex system where you have limited number of people, I mean engineers and other specialties. You have a tight deadline. There's lots of stakeholders to take care of. I mean, CEO, CPO, so Chief Product Officer, Chief Information Security Officer, Chief Operating Officer, you name it. What approach would you take out of the 4 suggested ones? And let's focus on those 4 suggested ones. You don't need to remember them by heart. You will also see them in your voting platform, so on Slido. But that's the very general problem we have ahead of us. Okay, the first solution. I define a detailed plan for everyone and just execute it because I'm the CTO, right? So I have the power to execute it. Solution number two, I sit with my teams, we defined a detailed plan together, and then we follow it. That's the second approach. Let's move to the third one. I define mission for the teams. I provide them with all the possible context I have. I give them opportunity to inspect and adapt underway. I delegate responsibilities accordingly, and I support them all the time. That's the third suggestion, how we could solve this very general problem. Or the fourth one, I am inspired by how Jurgen Klopp runs his teams. Such stars like, Robert Lewandowski get an opportunity to rise. We have Champions League to win ahead of us, and I would like to run our team like Jurgen. That's my third suggested solution. Okay, and now it's voting time. So let me start the quiz. And now you should see on your Slido how people answer. So you should see more or less something like this. We have a live quiz, 1 out of 5 questions. People answering. I see the results in the meantime. I still see people answering it, so I give you time. There's like 20 people have already answered. I know that there's 50 participating actively, so still let me give some time. Okay, 35, still 15 people waiting to vote. Okay. Let me vote as well. Don't get inspired by me. I will vote for the Jurgen Klopp solution. Boom. Okay. All right. Okay. So we have the answers, right? As you can see, none of the people voted for I define a detailed plan for everyone and execute it. 10% people said, okay, let's sit with my team, define the plan and execute it. 80% spoke about mission. And almost 10%, including me, voted for the Jurgen Klopp case. Great, okay, so let's get back to the presentation. And let's talk about potential solutions. So I have 4 of them on the board, as you can see. And to answer this question, I would like to refer to types of leadership that are typically mentioned when we speak about DevOps. And there is central command and there is mission command. And to understand those leaders, how they act, it's good to start with their assumptions. So what assumptions about the world they have? And usually people who command centrally, they think that the world is predictable, unlike the people who are kind of mission command type of leadership. They believe that the world is unpredictable. So it consists of unknown unknowns. And with this underlying assumption, usually you take actions based on what you believe in. So what are the behavioral trends of such leaders? If the world is predictable, then basically what I can do, I can invent a plan. And me being effective as a leader is just forcing people to follow the plan or rewarding those who are obedient. That's why centralization works. If the world is predictable, that's why obedience works. If the world is predictable, and that's why compliance is so desirable, if the world is actually predictable. If you still think that there's lots of unknowns in the world and the world is complex, then maybe any kind of centrally trying to control it is bound to fail. And maybe decentralization is the way to do it. Maybe cooperation is the way to solve complex problems. If you, based on these assumptions and those behavior trends, usually the communication style with the former is vertical, so top down. So me as a CTO, I say, okay, that's the problem, that's the solution, that's the plan, go and do it. So that's the vertical. I just order commands to people. Whereas in mission command, of course, I need to share the context. So that's how I share it to people in my teams. But also I encourage horizontal communication. So I encourage building bridges between people. And eventually leadership styles, obviously the former one, this is based on directing. So I give orders and I direct people. Whereas in mission command, it's delegating. And if you try to analyze those quotes from 4 types of leaders, the first one, he speaks or she speaks about detailed plan. So more or less, we can deduce that she or he thinks that the world is predictable because we can try to embrace it with a plan. If you look at the second leader, she or he thinks that, okay, we should follow it. I do it with my team, but still I believe that following a plan is crucial. So I make my assumption that obedience and compliance is the source of effectiveness. What about the leader number 3? She or he speaks about, okay, we need to inspect and adapt. So this is typical when you are not sure where you are. So if you are like in a dark room, usually you won't be just following a plan when you're in a dark room of going inside it. You will most probably use your hands and try to feel the environment. And if you feel that there is something sharp or there's a wall, you will adapt based on what you inspect. So the leader number 3 thinks that the world is unpredictable. And that's why you should inspect the world, and that's why you should adapt. So taking initiative, people adapting to what they experience, is more or less the right approach, right? And obviously, because then I want to delegate as leader responsibilities. So that's a clear indication that about my leadership style that, oh, it's delegating, okay? What can I say about leader number 4? About her or his leadership style? I can say that she or he likes football. And I wouldn't get deeper into this. So what's the suggested solution? If I were to choose, I would choose leader number 3 as the one having higher probabilities to navigate inside complex environments. And this is my assumption as a leader. I believe that most of the problems we solve, they are in the complex domain, where there's lots of unknown unknowns and you need to discover them. And you should support discovering them and not just blindlessly follow a plan. Okay. So mission command. That's usually the type of leadership which may have higher probability of succeeding in the complex environment. All right. That was leadership. Now let's move on to another dilemma. Let's talk about culture. What the dilemma may be. So the product we've been building is live on production, and one of our customers, who in the past publicly complained about our service, experienced a downtime. Luckily, it happened outside their business or peak hours, so little damages were caused. What do we do about this situation? And now let's examine the potential solutions. So, because there are no major consequences and everything works now, and customer doesn't like us anyway, let's not make a fuss about it in our organization, and let's just move on. That's one of the approaches. The other one, because site reliability engineers, they are responsible for smooth deployment to production, they failed. We will not improve if people aren't held accountable, so they should be made accountable. Most probably someone will have to face consequences, as in the future, damages can be more serious. We were just lucky enough that it happened outside peak hours, so the damages were small, but what's the guarantee that in the future the damages will be bigger, won't be bigger, or more serious? So that's the solution number 2. Let's move on to solution number 3. I've seen this Giphy, I don't know if you've seen it, where a senior sysadmin is sitting at a bar and drinking whiskey while a junior sysadmin is in a panic mode during an outage. And I like to be the former one or behave like the former one, so I keep calm and just carry on and do my stuff. I will fix it, but this is, business as usual for me as an engineer. So that's the solution number 3. And solution number 4, hey, we failed. Failure is an opportunity to learn, so let's discover how to improve our way of working. Because in the future, damages can be more serious. And it's a matter of luck that it happened outside of peak hours. Okay, so these are 4 suggested solutions. Now it's time to vote. So let me enable voting for another one. You should see another question. I share my browser as if I was a participant. So yeah. 17 people has already voted. So I'm waiting up till it's 50. That's 22. It's 30. Let's wait still a couple of seconds. I'm a big fan of Giphies, so I will vote for the third case. Okay, I've just sent it. All right. Let me share the results then. I still see some, oh, still some people are voting. Give me a second, 45. Okay, so the results. Overwhelming majority of people voted for the fourth case. Some voted for the first, for the second, and for the third. Okay, so let's get back to the presentation and let's analyze it a bit. So we have 4 cultures described, right? And apparently, it's been a part of State of DevOps report throughout the years and also inside the Accelerate book. But there are 3 types of cultures, or the model using 3 types of cultures seems to be highly relevant in the DevOps context. Although originally when it was prepared by Vestrum, I think it was in the Netherlands, it was used to describe culture in hospitals. Apparently there was lots of accidents in hospitals. And it was observed that following or having even more strict procedures inside hospitals didn't lead to more safe environment for the patients. So Vestrum decided to examine this, and he made a hypothesis that maybe this is about culture, which is inside hospitals. And apparently this was true. So his hypothesis that maybe this is something to do with culture, working culture inside the hospital, is correlated with how safe the environment is for the patients. If we transform it into our IT world, it may mean how frequently we fail, right? And what kind of disasters we cause as people responsible for our IT systems. So basically, 3 cultures. And the main distinction between them is based on how we process as an organization, how we process information. So in pathological cultures, information is hidden. In bureaucratic, it's ignored. Whereas in generative, it's being sought. So you're actively encouraged to look for information. Not surprisingly, in pathological cultures, messengers are killed because they bring bad news. In bureaucratic, they are tolerated, but nothing is done about this. And generative cultures, they train people to be messengers. So they train people to detect weak signals and act on them, right? Find ways how to solve stuff. In pathological cultures, if you look at those assumptions above, problems are hidden. In bureaucratic, usually organizations forgive mistakes. In generative, mistakes are source of learning. And consequently, in pathological cultures, responsibility is avoided. In bureaucratic, it's strictly divided. And in generative, it's shared. But don't mix it with diluted, that no one feels responsible. Obviously, my experience, and not only my experience, is that there are no pure pathological, bureaucratic, or generative cultures. You should think about organizations having a mix of cultures. Perhaps in certain departments, cultures are different, or in different areas of organization, there may be a, I don't know, center of mass maybe towards generative culture, while in other places towards pathological culture. But let's analyze the descriptions of the cultures we have. So the culture number one, let's not make a fuss about it in our organization. This indicates that most probably problems are hidden in this organization, which suggests that it may have a dominating pathological aspect of its culture. If we look at culture number two, SREs have failed. So most probably the person saying this statement thinks that responsibility is strictly divided. I'm a developer, or I'm a business analyst, or I'm a QA, or I don't know, I'm a support person. So these are the SREs who failed. So this is their responsibility because responsibility is strictly divided. If we look at culture number four, of course, culture number three, this is just a minor joke from my side. We say, okay, we failed, and every failure is an opportunity to learn. So mistakes are a source of learning, right? And this indicates, like most of you found this out, that culture number four is the suggested solution, right? But we as leaders, or we are just as people inside organization, we should take care of building culture typical for generative cultures, right? So trying to build an environment where information is sought, where messengers are trained, and mistakes are source of learning. And just to give an example, blameless postmortems. I guess most of you heard about this. Maybe you've seen also companies publicly sharing their postmortems, like Netflix, or in Poland, Allegro, for instance. This is an indicator that they are trying to have generative culture, right? Where they show that mistakes are source of learning. So this is something we should take care of as people inside the organization. Okay, that was culture aspect. Now let's move to something which is a bit more or leans towards engineering, which is architecture. Okay, so imagine that so far our system was a monolith, but it's high time we refactor it, because the number of features we need to develop, transactions per second, just based on users we have, or growing number of users, and the number of people inside our organization or development teams is growing. So how should we deal with this situation? Okay, and again, 4 different solutions. First one, I question that we need to refactor our architecture in advance. We should keep it as it is. So there is a BA team, so business analysis team, dev team, QA team, ops team, and basically we shouldn't prevent our monolith from growing. Let's just wait and see how it goes. Okay, that's one of the solutions. What about the other solution? We need to crush the monolith and divide it into components. Each component will be organized around the business domain, and each team will be responsible for at least one domain, one business domain, right? So we create a team which consists of maybe people with the skills of business analysis, development, QA, operations, several such teams. And then we try to crash the monolith into separate domains and just make the teams responsible or own certain domains, right? But each domain has one owner or one team owning it, right? That's the solution number 2. Solution number 3, again, we need to crash the monolith, divide it into components, organize, those components represent business domains, teams are organized around business domains, but there'll also be a platform with its corresponding team. So there'll also be a team owning a platform. And what's the role of the platform? The role of the platform is to unify how we utilize our infrastructure, how we do continuous integration, continuous deployment, maybe how logging is done, how security is implemented, how, monitoring is done, how compliance is done if we are inside a regulated business, you name it, right? So again, we have teams, for instance, cross-functional teams like BA, Dev, QA, Ops. There is also a platform team. And while crushing the monolith, we also make a decision to build a platform on which those components run right? That's the solution number 3. And solution number 4. Again, we need to crash the monolith and divide it into functional components. So there will be a separate front-end layer, middleware with some, I don't know, business logic, maybe some ESB, so enterprise service bus, and data layer. Each element of the architecture will have its corresponding team, right? So we have a front-end team, business logic team or middleware team, ESB team, and data team. And basically, we'll try to build our architecture the following way, right? So that was the solution number 4. And let's move on to voting. Let me enable voting for another question, which is question number 3. And you should see it, yeah. So that's what you should see either on your smartphones or in your browsers. And let's wait for the answers. Still waiting for 30 people. Okay, still 20 left. Uh, 10 more people. Okay, I guess I may be wrapping up. So let's get back to the answers or potential answers. Sorry, maybe let me share the results. The results are as follows. Boom. So majority voted for option number 3, which is platform supporting components organized around business domains, and teams are organized around those components. 1/5 voted for the ESB or functional separation of responsibilities in the architecture, and so does the teams. And some minor votes for, hey, let's not touch anything, let's wait. And also let's, yeah, the second scenario, so maybe without the platform. This may be the most controversial dilemma, and I wouldn't like, regardless of what's the answer, I wouldn't like anyone to interpret it that I criticize one of the approaches. I'm just sharing my experience where I believe the higher chances are to succeed, but definitely it depends on the context of the organization. Like, for instance, what's the cost of refactoring the architecture? So let's move on to the answers or suggested answers and justification behind them. So we have 4 types of organization, and it's impossible to analyze architecture isolated from the way we are organized as people and as teams. And I guess most of you know, if not, then I'm happy to be the one who introduced you to this concept, which is Conway's law. It was observed by Melvin Conway in the late 60s. He was a software engineer, but he already observed what's now coined as Conway's law in the late 60s. And what's the term? So any organizations that design a system, defined broadly, will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. Usually, if you haven't seen this law, it's good to read it for the second time. So let me read it for the second time. Any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. And just to explain it to you, let's assume you're a company and you are also needing help from an outsourcing company and they provide a team, development team, most probably your core team, when talking to outsourcing team, they will invent an architecture when one team will be exposing an API for the other team, because they would like to optimize friction and just basically how tough it is to communicate. So that's why they would like to communicate over API, which will be strictly defined. We define the rules of the API, and that's the easiest example. The Conway law is usually becomes more visible in larger organizations. So that's the first thing. The second thing, when we should analyze these different solutions, is also what kind of designs support teams to take end-to-end responsibility. By me saying end-to-end, it means from concept to cache. So there is a business concept, and we as a team are perhaps responsible for designing it, implementing it, testing it, deploying it, and monitor it in production. And maybe even verify what's the value behind this, right? So if we take into account those two aspects, then let's look at what Conway law tells us. Organization number one, the architecture and underlying organization, the reason it's, according to me, doesn't support Conway law is that we have one big piece of code, and there are several teams trying to contribute to this. So most probably there will be lots of friction, there will be lots of complexity management, dependency management, teams interfering with each other, which usually results in high lead times and seldom deployments to production. Whereas the second organization, we have teams organized around business domains. There are high chances that those teams can work independently of each other. It's not that perfect, but the number of interactions maybe, or the complexity is encapsulated inside those teams. And maybe thanks to automated tests, the domains, when they need to talk to each other, it happens over APIs and it's heavily tested. And that's how you, as a one team, can verify if you're not breaking something in the other team's code and their respective business domain. So that's why organization number two most probably supports Conway law. Similarly, organization number three, where I should stress it out that the platform, they should treat other teams as their customers. And the platform, usually, it exposes APIs for continuous integration, continuous deployment, automated provisioning, monitoring, etc. And not Jira for issuing tickets, hey, please set up an environment for me. No, it should be over API. So that's the suggested, that's how Conway's law is applied in organization number three. And also Conway law is implemented in, sorry, not culture, but copy-paste mistake, organization number four, because we have certain aspects of architecture and we have corresponding teams. So there is a front-end team and there is a business logic team, and they have their independent piece of code. And that would be the answer, that those three organizations have higher chances to succeed. But if we look at end-to-end responsibility, organization number two, let's assume this is a bank, and one team is responsible for accounts, the other team is responsible for, cards, the other one for debts, the other one for deposits, etc. So if we are responsible for accounts, then we are, and our domain is basically account, then maybe we have chances to succeed and work independently at high frequency and high stability. Similarly, organization number three. But if we look at organization number four, if we as a business, if you want to introduce something like a change in account, then most probably four teams needs to be engaged, because there is a change needed in the front-end layer, there is a change needed in the middleware, maybe we need to add or modify something in the enterprise service bus, and maybe we need to modify something at the data layer. And this means that none of the team is able to take end-to-end responsibilities. They can start finger pointing that someone broke, I don't know, the data layer. That's why it doesn't work in the front end. You name it, I guess all of us were in such scenarios. So if I were to name what are the solutions which give higher chances to succeed, I would say it's organization number 2 and organization number 3. Typically, if you are a bigger organization, you will move towards number 3 case, because building a platform usually is an answer to trying to unify things and optimize, for instance, costs. That's why platforms are introduced. But of course, it depends also on technological stack. If it is more or less uniform, then it's easier to introduce a platform, even maybe not just infrastructure as a service, but maybe even platform as a service kind of operating model, right? Okay, so that was the architecture. Now let's move on to the process. Okay. Okay, so what's the potential dilemma? We have a great idea for a feature. We'd like to offer our customers the advanced forecasting capabilities. By saying forecasting capabilities, I mean ability to detect patterns and suggest answers to those patterns. So they will get a suggestion based on their current users' behavior, how the trends may change in the future. And consequently, they could offer them more tailored services. So how do we approach this idea for a feature from business? Solution number 1. It sounds like a machine learning problem, so a recommendation engine. So let's use TensorFlow to build the engine and the model. Let's employ, I don't know, Spark and Hadoop for live processing of events and training of our model. You know, customers will be delighted. Cutting edge technologies. So that's one of the solutions. The other one, it's not an engineering challenge. Let's hire some key account managers for our customers who will just offer those forecasting advice based on their experience. So there is a dedicated person who will take care of our customer and just will share their advice, right? Or maybe let's just build a generator of random forecasts to give an impression to our customers that we use some rocket science under the hood. That's solution number 3. Or solution number 4, let's take one of our customers and take our best data analyst to secretly prepare forecasts as if they were generated automatically. And based on what we learn out of cooperation with that customer, we'll make further product decisions. All right, so that's these are the 4 solutions. Let me enable voting. So what you should shortly see is question number 4. Boom, yeah. Please start answering. Half of the votes are casted, so let's wait still for the remaining half. Unless it doesn't grow, the number of votes, okay, it grows. Okay, I guess it's not growing, so I will stop here. Okay, let me share the results with you. All right. So half of people voted for option number 1. Employing, TensorFlow, Spark, Hadoop, just to solve the engineering challenge. Then the next most popular solution is the last one. Yeah, let's just take a business analyst and one customer, and let's just see what can we learn out of this by our customer using this thing, and then less votes for just hiring key account managers, and almost 10% for, I don't know, implementing a random forecast generator. All right. So let me try to add some logic to the potential answer. So we are speaking about process, and the introduction of the idea was, or of the dilemma was, we have an idea for a feature, right? What's typically misunderstood is that features, they are hypotheses. Maybe not verified, we don't know that, but usually we should treat them as hypotheses, not as things written in stone. And if we speak about MVP, just a raw definition from, I don't know, Lean Startup book, this is a version of a new product which allows team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort. So, and I bolded this, with the least effort. I don't know how many of you know the Dropbox story, but the Dropbox story, it was, I think, for sure before 2010, when cloud technologies were not that popular, before they decided to implement something which allows to synchronize files between different platforms. It was a huge engineering challenge. So what they did, still he's the CEO of Dropbox, Drew Houston, I guess. He created a movie where he said, "Okay, we are entering beta. Let me share with you what we did." And he started manipulating files on his Mac and on his Windows, and just seeing how it's all synced, deleted the file. He could retrieve it from the history or previous revisions, all the stuff which we're used to now with, I don't know, iCloud, Google Drive, or some external solutions like Dropbox itself. The funny thing about what Dropbox did, that even though it gave an impression that it's almost implemented, no single line of code was written. It was just a movie. But I think it was 90,000 people signed up for the service during the first day. Sign up in the sense that I'm interested in using the service when it's alpha released or when it's live. This was a proof for people at Dropbox that potentially they have found a problem. They have found a solution. The problem was that people need to use USB stickers to move files around. The solution was Dropbox and the way it's done and the way it was presented. And maybe they're willing to pay for this and pay to Dropbox. So this is a typical definition of minimum viable product, not mixed with the first version or the prototype, because these are these are different things. And if we stick to this definition, it is the process number 4, which follows this, because employing TensorFlow and developing a model and maybe building a Hadoop cluster and also Spark, this is quite a challenge to build this without a guarantee that we are solving a problem for a customer. So DevOps is about high performing, and DevOps is about or being high performing. Maybe one of the biggest optimization is not to write a line of code initially, because what happens if people don't have a problem and they don't need a solution? Then perhaps we save lots of our time by just engaging one person into verifying if that's the solution, and even learning maybe the direction is right, but maybe it requires some tweaking. So it's good to discover it without writing a line of code. And by the way, this technique, it's called Wizard of Oz. That's one of the techniques of verification of business hypothesis, right? I encourage you to get familiar with Dropbox example. Also, the other example is Zappos. It's not that popular in Europe. It's popular in the US. This is it's been bought by Amazon, but this is a shoe selling company. Back in the days, I think it was 2003, they made an assumption that maybe there are people who are willing to buy shoes over the internet, and they didn't build e-commerce platform from scratch. They tried to verify whether their assumption or their hypothesis is correct, and they did it a similar way. We're using similar technique. I encourage you to further to read about this further on. Okay, so that's why process number 4 have perhaps higher chances to succeed. All right, and then the last one under the idea of automation. Okay, so we decided to add a new feature, and one of its core functionalities is based on sending events to our backend about every action of our user. So any mouse movement, any, I don't know, keyboard press, whatever event about this is will be sent to our backend for further analysis. And just like so far, only clicks and certain buttons generated some API calls. Now we will, with the current number of customers, we estimate that our traffic towards our backend will increase 1,000 times, and it will cause 100 million events a minute, right? So you divide it by 60, and you have more than 1 million of events a second reaching our backend services. So neither our code nor our infrastructure has experienced such a load before. How should we approach it? All right. Okay. So one of the solutions, let's buy a course at Udemy for our developers about performance optimization, and after completing it, they are ready to build such a system. That's one of the approaches. The other one, let's develop the system further with best practices in the back of our heads. We will remember about that this is going to be a high traffic system. And once we were live, we will just optimize it continuously by detecting bottlenecks, right? That's also a solution. Solution number 3, I create a separate backend for that feature, and I will add code to our existing front-end logic that will secretly call the new backend in parallel to the real business logic. And from day one, we will have our secret backend being under load of existing customers, and based on this, we will be building functionality on top of it. On top of our secret backend for that feature. And solution number 4, this is not a development problem; it's an operations problem, and let them think about, how the infrastructure, what the infrastructure should be to just sustain such traffic. Okay. Okay, and that's the last dilemma. So let me spin off the last question. Okay, the voting has started. All right, people answering, around 1/3 of them. So let's wait a couple of seconds for some late voters. All right. Okay, we got stuck at 35, so let me share the results. How you voted. So there is a slight winner here, which is solution number 3, creating a separate backend, and even before features are implemented already apply heavy load on it and develop functionalities there secretly. But there is quite a big group, like 1/3 or more than 1/3, who would just basically trust their skills, develop it according to best practices, and then figure out any problems once we are live. And maybe some minority saying, hey, it's an ops problem. All right. So let's try to justify one of those answers. The way if I were to make the decision, I would look for inspiration in the term coined separate deployments from releases. So what does it mean? It's important to understand the difference. What's a deployment, what's a release in our lingo. So deployment, this is the act of deploying a change to application or infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily mean that new feature or new stuff is available for our end users. This is a technical thing, and a team is responsible for doing this. I mean, dev team, right? They are responsible for the deployments. Whereas the release, this is actually releasing some functionality to end users which have business impact. And this is, I don't know, a product manager or product owner or any kind of business owner who makes a decision about enabling certain feature for our end users, right? So this could be a product owner telling that one of the deployments should be enabled to end users. For instance, by changing a feature flag or a feature switch on production, and suddenly a new functionality pops up. And basically, the idea of separating deployments from releases is that we deploy changes to production more frequently when the features are released to end users. The reason we want to do this is to reduce risk associated with a change. So counterintuitively to some, I know organizations where releases happen, or deployments, sorry, happen once a quarter or once a half year, because usually those organizations feel that they reduce risk by not touching the production too often. And this seems very natural, I would say. And that, however counterintuitive it may seem, doing more frequent deployments where the delta is smaller allows us to detect problems earlier. So detect regression errors, detect that something doesn't work, that we've just introduced performance issue. And if we fail with our testing, then maybe we can learn fast that something went wrong. And thanks to this, we are able to track down what caused that problem and fix it when the impact is still low. Especially if you also use such techniques like, for instance, canary releases, where we gradually release our functionality, maybe initially towards friends and family, where in case of failure, it doesn't hurt us a lot because those users won't leave us. So yeah, that's usually context from non-regulated environments. In regulated environments where you have PCI DSS or, I don't know, EBA on top of you or over your head, there are different ways how to deal with this, but it's not a topic of this presentation. But what happened in this example, and what's the solution? What I would choose is solution number 3, because this is the implementation of the strategy called dark launch. I recommend to you reading the case how Facebook introduced Facebook chat in, I think it was 2007, so almost 15 years ago. Facebook chat is a grandpa of or grandma of Messenger used nowadays. How they introduced Facebook chat in a web browser environment where they had 40 million daily active users. And during the 1 year when they were working on it, even the number of users, I think, doubled in that time. And what they used was the dark launch strategy, and it's worth knowing this to solve this kind of problems. Okay, So we are done. Let me summarize it a bit. What I tried to walk you through today is to look at DevOps not only from purely technical perspective, which I'm a big fan of because I'm an engineer myself, or at least consider myself an engineer still. But there are different aspects which influence our work, which is leadership. What kind of leaders, what kind of atmosphere, or what kind of ground rules they set up in the organization. And if they follow the mission command leadership style, the chances are high that this will be the environment where DevOps can flourish. Obviously, each of us, or all of us, have impact on culture. Leaders have a special impact on culture, but trying to work on generative culture, where mistakes are a source of learning and there's no blame games, then generative culture is a good predictor that we can build high-performing organization with stable deployments, frequent stable deployments. To achieve that, one of the ways is to have certain architecture. And I was speaking about Conway law and enabling team to be end-to-end responsible. We thought that microservices architecture is one of the examples of achieving this, but not the only example. And there are distinctions that you could also have a platform, which is typical for bigger organization, or pure microservice architecture. But microservice architecture is just one of the examples, potential examples. It's not the only one. When I speak about process and we think about being high performing, one of the biggest optimizations we can do is by not writing even a single line of code or deploying a single piece of infrastructure. Because maybe some ideas by default, they're not solving problems for our customers. And the sooner we learn this, the more time we save, right? For us to focus on something which really brings value. And that's why I was speaking about the true MVP concept. And I also refer you to the Lean Startup book, which is some kind of like, fundamentals for this type of thinking. And we could speak about automation. I could speak about CI, CD. I could speak about infrastructure as code, immutable infrastructure, you name it. But I decided to draw your attention to that one of the ways to achieve high throughput of deployments, but at the same time manage risk associated with a deployment to production, is to think about deployments versus releases. And at least in my experience, it frequently meant we have to develop custom code and custom infrastructure code for this. For sure, there are tools which enable this, but usually, at least in my context, the problem was so specific that we had to do it in a custom way to have, I don't know, feature toggle mechanism. Canary releases are frequent now, especially with Kubernetes or cloud stuff. But yeah, that's the original concept. And basically, that's it. So thanks for your attention. And let me get back just to the general view. And yeah, I'm open to questions if there are any.